Hi, my name is Michael Sahno. I'm Jewish and I love Israel. So if you love Israel, if you love being Jewish, or if you have an unwavering connection to the land of Israel, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? My name is Michael Sahno. Welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast, the only positive podcast about the state of Israel. Hey, listen, if this is your first time watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you want to take this with you to, I don't know, you got the gyms open, you can go there. You want to go for a run, you want to listen to us in your car, you can download us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. Okay, guys, hey, welcome to the show. This one is probably going to be one of the most important episodes that I ever do. It is... If you saw the title of it, you know this one is about Zionism. What is Zionism? That question is so packed. There are so many different kinds of Zionism, but they all boil down to the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start. First off, I have a ton of notes. If you're watching this, you can see I have just tons and tons of notes. But I'm going to start off with reading exactly. And this is important because there are a lot of misconceptions about what Zionism actually is. And I'm going to let you know. I'm going to give you the definition of Zionism. So, Zionism, if I can read this, Zionism is both an ideology and nationalist movement among the Jewish people that espouses the reestablishment of and support for a Jewish state in the territory defined as a historic land of Israel, roughly corresponding to Canaan, the Holy Land, or the region of Palestine. Modern Zionism emerged in the late 19th century in Central and Eastern Europe as a national revival movement, both in reaction to newer waves of anti-Semitism and as a response to a Skala or Jewish Enlightenment. We're going to come back to that. Soon after this, most leaders of the movement associated the main goal with creating the desired state in Palestine, then an area controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Now, a lot of people come out and they say that Zionism is just a response to the Holocaust, okay? And that since the state was established in 1948, they incorrectly assume that events during World War II, which happened from 39 to 45 with, the Holocaust, that's the reason why Zionism and the state of Israel occurred. Well, that's not true. It's not true. It's not true at all. It's interesting. It's fascinating, actually. And I took a couple of classes when I was in college on this. I was a Jewish studies major in college at the City College of New York. Go Jewish Harvard. Go Beavers. And well, that's an interesting story. So City College of New York was called the Jewish Harvard because Jews couldn't get into Harvard, and that was a school that brought about some great Jewish minds, some great Jewish thinkers, poets, writers, political minds, all of that. But that's another story. We'll talk about that later. What we're talking about right now is Zionism. Now, where did Zionism? What is the core? We know what the core tenets are. What led to the development of Zionism? Well, that comes from, as they were talking about, the Haskalah movement. And I may be saying that incorrectly. Some of these terms, different professors pronounce it differently. So if I get it wrong, please just bear with me. The information's correct. So that concept of Jewish elevation being better than what Eastern European, well, being better than what European countries' notion of what the Jew is and what the Jew could became part of what's called the Jewish Enlightenment. The Haskalah, Moses Mendelssohn, and he was a prime mover in that movement. So from this, you got the concept and this group of writers who were the Maskilim, and the Maskilim were the people who looked to create this mythic identity for Jews. Not, and it's weird because when I say mythic, not mythic in the sense that it's all made up, but mythic in the sense of chest out, shoulders back, stand with your head held high. And this, of course, led to what I've referenced before, which is, and I love this phrase, masculine Judaism, which has what I guess what would be called a sexualized term, but it's not. It's because women could take part in masculine Judaism, and it was just the concept of working the land and being physically strong and self-sufficient and self-reliant, because in these places land ownership by Jews wasn't allowed. It just wasn't something that was ever going to happen. So these groups of people in the Haskalah movement and in these Maskilim, these writers, they got together and they came up with these ideas and these concepts for developing and moving Jews to a place where they could be safe. Because at the time, at the turn of the 20th century and prior to that, there were pogroms, massacres, where these armed groups would come in and slaughter and rape and just kill men, women, and children wantonly because they were Jews. Sometimes it was religious. We're Christian, we're Eastern Orthodox, we're Catholic, we have to do this. And these pogroms go all the way back to, from what I've seen, they probably go back further, but they go all the way back to the Crusades, where the Rhine Valley had some prominent pogroms by Catholic crusaders leaving towards the Holy Land to liberate it. So nice of you. So pogroms and personal safety was something that was of paramount importance to these Jews living at this time. So with this history of deference to greater forces, they said, no, we want to be stronger than that. We want to be better than that. And of course, there were events that acted as catalysts to pushing the Zionist movement forward. One of them, the seminal moment for Theodor Herzl, was during the Dreyfus affair, when a French captain, I think it was a captain, French captain was accused of treason. He was a member of the High Command, and he was accused of treason for Germany, I think it was. And when it turns out it was actually a Hungarian guy who did it. Son of a gun. But that led him to write, and I have it here, that led him to write a pamphlet called Der Judenstaat, the State of the Jews. This was before he even wrote The Jewish State, which was basically the model, what we would call the modern framework for Zionist ideals on what a Jewish state would be like. Now I'm going to take a sip of coffee. Hold on one second. Peter, that was for you. Boom, love the coffee. All right, so now that we know what Zionism is, and we know that Zionism goes all the way back to, I mean, even we could say as a political movement all the way back to the 1700s, late 1700s. It really started to gain ground in the late 1800s. And a number of different Zionist streams or concepts or ideas on what Zionism meant to different communities. Now, you have to understand Zionism. Oh, that was hiccups from the coffee, sorry. So a lot of people, when they think of Zionism right now, they think of settlers in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. And that's true. They are Zionists, absolutely. But and from what I understand, a large number of those individuals are Dati Leumi, they're religious Zionists. And that sort of pretty much in the public frame, in the public mind, is what people think of when they think of Zionists. They think of them, ironically, they think of them as extremists. And I don't subscribe to that. Zionism is anyone who ascribes to the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. And that, as I said, goes all the way back. Now, what I was talking about when I said there were different flavors of Zionism, I'm going to read off a bunch of these. And they started with, in the modern sense, they started with what's called practical Zionism. And that is a need in practical terms to implement Jewish immigration to the land of Israel, Aliyah, or moving up, the immigration of Jews to Israel, and settlement of the land as soon as possible, even if a charter over the land is not obtained. Now, that last sentence is really important because in the early days, I think the Rothschilds were involved in it. The banking family, the Rothschilds, there were Rothschilds who were ardent Zionists who supported moving families to Eretz Israel, to Israel, the home of what they perceived and what I perceive as the home of the Jews, the historical homeland of the Jews. And they wanted to get them moving there. And even if they had to lease the land, move there. There were land purchases that were done hold on, because that rolls into the next, which is political Zionism. And I started discussing that when I brought up Theodor Herzl. Now, Theodor Herzl, well, the practical Zionists, their main people who are involved in that, their main figureheads are Moshe Leib Lillenbaum and Leon Pinsker, and these were some great. Pinsker was a big Haskalah mind. So that goes back to the 1880s. I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, let me know. But the political Zionism was the next step. But these were all contemporaries, was the next step. And that was Theodor Herzl and Max Nordau. And they established the Zionist organization, the World Jewish Congress. And we're going to wrap this whole Zionism segment up with that. Now, Theodor Herzl, their approach espoused establishing for the Jewish people a publicly and legally assured home in Palestine. So what they wanted to do, they started by going to the Kaiser and asking him, I think it was the Kaiser. Was it the Kaiser? What's his name? Maybe he wasn't called I think it was, but he went and tried to get Germany to advocate on their behalf, and then he went and got Britain to advocate on their behalf, and that's where it was Britain who really came to the rescue and helped them out with that. And I'm not really going to talk about that right now because those are there are a bunch of British and UN documents and they come later in the story, and we're going to talk about that because I am going to do an episode on pre-state Israel. The next one is synthetic Zionism, which I didn't even know was a thing, which was espoused by Chaim Weizmann. Hold on just one sec. Leo Motzkin and Nahum Sokolov. You have to be careful because some of these are Eastern European names, the W's or the V's and whatever. And basically, synthetic Zionism was just a bundling of practical Zionism and political Zionism. So those were the early, way back before we even got people into Israel. Then we move into the Zionism as it morphed over time, and not much time, like a couple of decades, into labor Zionism. Now, labor Zionism, I will say, existed at around the same time as these others, as social movements among socialist Jews in Poland and Lithuania and Russia to some degree, but the big hotbeds were Poland and Lithuania. And that was Nachman Sirkin, Ber Borkov, Chai Arlasarov, and Burl Katznelson. So it's interesting because the labor Zionism developed off of Moses, and it might be Moses Hess instead of Moses Mendelssohn. I may have had the Haskalah man wrong, but hey, whatever. We'll learn from our mistakes. So Moses Hess's 1862 work, Rome and Jerusalem, The Last National Question, advocated moving Jews out of Europe and into what was Ottoman Palestine at the time. And Ber Burkov, continuing on Hess's work, he proposed the creation of a socialist society that would correct the inverted pyramid of Jewish society. Now, you have to understand, Jews were living in shtetls at the time. They were living in a section of Eastern Europe that was specifically tracted out for them by the czars. They couldn't leave. They couldn't move. They could only get the jobs that were available, that were allotted. There were a certain number of jobs that Jews could have. One of the stories of one of these men was that they wanted to be a lawyer, but there were only a certain number of slots for Jewish lawyers, so he became a doctor, which is hilarious that you could become a doctor. But I guess a doctor wasn't as elevated a status as it is today. But what's interesting about the labor Zionism is I was reading some stuff, and this came up in my class too, on Jewish Israeli literature, and all the bickering that went on by all these guys, by Bar Burkov and by who is it, Beryl Katznelson. And Katznelson cracks me up because he is this just grizzled looking guy, and him, if I get this right, he and early socialists got into really heated arguments about whether or not socialism would work in the Marxist philosophy in pre-state Israel, because there were no factories. There were very few factories. They didn't make anything. There was only agriculture. And Marxism was an industrialist, not an agricultural movement. So there were just, and what they proposed and what they developed over time, labor Zionism, what eventually became the kibbutz, which were the socialist collectives in pre-state Israel. They even exist to this day. And the other thing that's really interesting about labor Zionism is how kind of And I don't know how this works, how kind of insignificant David Ben-Gurion actually was in it in the beginning. He was seen as this tertiary periphery guy. So I got to finish that. I got to finish that biography to find out how he got himself in there. But yes, so then another one after labor Zionism is cultural Zionism by Achad Ha'am, whose name is also Asher Zvi Hirsch Ginsburg. I don't know if it's because he did what a lot of Jews did when they came to Israel, and that is Judaize their name. They got rid of the Germanic name that they had. Hold on just one sec. Interesting thing, a lot of those names like Schwartz, Black, were given because kingdoms and governments decided that people had to have last names for accounting purposes. So they took names. They didn't have last names. So a lot of them reverted to these or just plain made up Hebrew names. So it's pretty fascinating. So the next one, cultural Zionism, is a fulfillment of the national revival of the Jewish people. Says fulfillment of the national revival of the Jewish people should be achieved by creating a cultural center in the land of Israel and an educative center to the Jewish diaspora, which together will be a bulwark against the danger of assimilation and threatens the existence of the Jewish people. So from what I gathered, cultural Zionism is to ensure that we just as a people don't die out. I don't know if it had any political aspirations, but cultural Zionism is a part of Israel today. And I'm going to get into that because and is one of the things that the Jewish Agency and a lot of the arts and museums and historical structures that are in Israel do to this day. So cultural Zionism, and I'm going to talk about how all of these combine in the end. So the last three, so there's another one, and I'm gonna talk about that one before I talk about these last two, and that one is no, there are four. So I have revisionist Zionism. Now, revisionist Zionism, so revisionist history, revisionism is a weird term because if you use it the way revisionist historians say, well, that means you're changing history to fit the needs. And that's happened in Israel. There have been revisions in history that have had to have been made because apparently they were initially revised to make the state look good. Or there has been revision by Israel's enemies to make it look bad, saying they did things they didn't. But they've done things and said that they didn't as well. And we'll talk about that because that ties into revisionists Zionism, which is a revision of what Zionism originally was meant to be. And it emphasized the romantic elements of Jewish nationality and the historical heritage of the Jewish people in the land of Israel as the constituent basis for the Zionist national idea and the establishment of the Jewish state. So, in a nutshell, it is exactly what the Maskilim did, and where they elevated in the Zionist consciousness who they were, what they were. We are people who work the land. We are people who do this. But what's interesting is that elevation also happened in the labor movement. If you watch old videos about the kibbutzim and about how Jews have come after thousands of years and reclaimed their homeland. And it's really a great story, and it is 100% true, but that puffing of the chest and back of the pushing your shoulders back and your chin up. It's part of it. It was really impressed upon by the revisionist Zionists. They supported liberalism and particularly economic liberalism, and opposed labor Zionism and the establishment of a communist society in the land of Israel. And what's interesting about that is how that has developed over time into the economic powerhouse that Israel is to this day, and the individual rights and individual liberties that are needed, required for them to maintain a stable democracy. And that is, I mean, honestly, I do have to say that is due to the revisionist Zionism of Zev Jabotinsky and Menachem Begin. By putting those ideas in there, you know, you're not going to tell me where I have to work. I'm going to work where I want to work. And if I fail, I fail. But there is a bad side to I don't know. I guess there are people who subscribe to that, but there were people who also said, we like what you're doing, but we don't think you're doing it hard enough. One of the things that the revisionists advocated for, though, was, and I'm pretty sure this coincides with the 1929 massacre in Hebron, where the Jewish community in Hebron rapes, murders, all of that by their Arab neighbors. And it was instigated by the mullah of Jerusalem. That caused them to want to push back, to fight back, to gain a militant aspect to their Zionism. But there were some within the group who didn't think that they were militant enough, and they are what's called the revolutionary Zionists. And I know that I'm pushing over this and I'm brushing over this. That's because I'm going to dedicate an entire episode to this. Now, the revolutionary Zionists, Avraham Stern, Israel Eldad, and Uri Zvi Greenberg were self-described terrorists. That's what they called themselves. And they advocated attacking Arab communities in response, retaliation, doing first strikes, and doing some really messed up things. They would assassinate other Jews. They assassinated the British. Their main issue and their main bone of contention was ensuring that there was a unbridled, unobstructed flow of Jewish immigration into Israel. And when the British released the white paper and kind of put a clamp on it, they went into overdrive. They were responsible. They say it's the Irgun who are responsible. Well, they were responsible for the bombing at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. And what's interesting about that is originally Haganah, which was the Labor Party, Labor Zionists, Mapai and all of them, originally they said okay. David Ben-Gurion said okay. Golda Meir said okay. And then the Irgun, which were the militant arm of revisionist Zionism. So yeah, that's why there's got to be a whole episode. They said it's okay for the revisionists and the revolutionists to go and blow it up. And then all of a sudden they said, no, we don't support it. You need to stop. Lehi, which was the militant arm of the revolutionaries under Avraham Stern, the Stern Gang, they blew it up. And they were also responsible, apparently. No, they were. They were responsible. Them and the Irgun were responsible for a massacre on an Arab village, Deir Yassin. And there is, interestingly, some question as to whether or not actually Mapai, the labor, Ben-Gurion authorized it and then publicly denounced it. So there's a lot of blame. There's a lot, and we're going to go into that. I'm just trying to tell you about the different Zionism streams, but they are two of them, and it's important to understand that there are different flavors and styles of Zionism. The next one is, wow, go from that to this, religious Zionism. Now, religious Zionism was established by Yitzhak Yaakov Reines, the founder of Mizrachi, which is a organization that, if I've got this correct, that wanted immigration to the land of Israel, and by Abraham Isaac Kook, who is just an amazing guy, interesting story, and basically Jewish nationality and the establishment of the state of Israel is a religious duty to them, demanded and derived from the Torah. So it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment to move to Israel and to be a part of the state and to bring about the state, because he maintained that human acts of redeeming the land will bring about the Messiah. As their slogan states, the land of Israel for the people of Israel, according to the Torah of Israel. Now, I don't know how in depth they push for a religious state, or if they are just advocating for a Jewish state, on a state run by Jews versus a state run on the Torah. I don't know. I know they live their lives according to the Torah, and they would hope that the government would live according to the Torah. But I don't know. I have to go more deeply into that. And actually, that's a good idea for an episode. I'll do an episode on that. The other one and the last one is Reform Zionism, and the Zionist arm of the Reform and Progressive branch of Judaism. This is basically Zionism based on democratic principles. There are issues that I have with it because it doesn't necessarily push for a Jewish state. But I could be wrong about that. Hey, if I learned something new, I learned something new. But yeah, so there are so many different types of Zionism, and that Reform Zionism goes all the way back to, from what I understand, the 1800s, and purports to be in accordance with Reform Judaism and their ideas and goals for Judaism, and Progressive Judaism, which, again, in accordance with their ideals and goals. So all of these guys got together, and I only have a couple more minutes. I want to wrap this up. They all got together at the World Jewish Congress. The first one was August 29th to August 32nd, 1897. And in it, they adopted the Basel Program. And that is, Zionism aims at establishing for the Jewish people a publicly and legally assured home in Palestine for the attainment of this purpose. The Congress considers the following means serviceable: the promotion of the settlement of Jewish agriculturalists, artisans, and tradesmen in Ottoman Palestine; the federation of all Jews into local or general groups according to the laws of the various countries; the strengthening of the Jewish feeling and consciousness, meaning it's okay to be a Jew, be proud to be a Jew; preparatory steps for the attainment of those governmental grants which are necessary to the achievement of the Zionist purpose. And until 1917, the World Zionist Organization pursued a strategy of building a Jewish national home through persistent small-scale immigration. The founding of such bodies as the Jewish National Fund, Plant a Tree for Israel in 1901, a charity that bought land for Jewish settlements, and the Anglo-Palestine Bank, which provided loans for Jewish businesses and farmers. And in 1942, at the Biltmore Conference, the movement included, next page, please. The movement included, for the first time, and express objective of the establishment of a Jewish state in the land of Israel. So, what year was that? Holy junk. That was in 1942. So that was during the Holocaust. They made that proposal. Now, the 28th Zionist Congress, meeting in Jerusalem in 1968, they adopted the 5 points of the Jerusalem program as the aims of Zionism today. And they are the unity of the Jewish people and the centrality of Israel in Jewish life. Boom. Ingathering of the Jewish people in its historic homeland, Eretz Israel, through Aliyah from all countries. So, bringing Jewish people to emigrate to Israel, their historic homeland. The strengthening of the state of Israel based on the prophetic vision of justice and peace. Preservation of the identity of the Jewish people through fostering of Jewish and Hebrew education and of Jewish spiritual and cultural values. And the protection of Jewish rights everywhere. So Zionism basically is about establishing a home for Jews in their historic homeland. And that, whether right or wrong in their application of it, is what all of these groups of amazing men and women who have worked tirelessly, some at the cost of their lives, to bring a safe haven for Jews everywhere and to bring them home. And as always, next year, Jerusalem became a reality. Wow, that's so cool. Oh, I got chills. Woo. So, all right, that's it. We went a little bit over. I'm a little moved. This was such a cool episode. I really got to flesh out Zionism, and I wound up going on a little bit of a couple of side trips, just because there's so much information and it is such a hilly journey, with so many turnoffs with scenic views. I don't know. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being part of this episode and learning everything that you could about Zionism. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want to get the brand new episodes when they come out. If you want to take us with you, as I said before, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. Also, definitely check out our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. And on Instagram and Facebook, I think even on Twitter, I'm putting out all of our 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew stuff. I finished the Aleph Bet deck, and the video is being edited right now for our Kickstarter campaign. So if you're interested, please be an investor in this wonderful opportunity to teach people the modern Hebrew language. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot, guys. Toda raba, lehitarot ve yalla bye.
לחישה בלילה והיא איננה גם שרחוקה היא ממני
זיכרונה עולה שוב בליבי הלילה איך אותה רציתי כל חיי
ידי בידה ולאור ירח עוד יאיר לי כוכב ביקשתי חלום שלא נגמר
רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי, הושעתי לפרח הנשאר.
רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי, הושעתי לפרח הנשאר.